Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. The leaders of Italy, France, and Germany are in Kiev as U.S. pledges $1 billion in additional military aid to Ukraine. The Chinese leader reiterates his country's support for Russia in matters of sovereignty and security. And Turkey says it has established a direct link between Russian and Ukrainian generals for safe grain export. Europe's three most powerful national leaders are putting on a united front. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi have arrived at Ukraine's capital, Kiev, to show their support. The visit comes a day before the European Commission is set to make a recommendation on Ukraine's status as a candidate for EU membership. Speaking to reporters on the platform as he arrived in the Ukrainian capital, Mr. Macron said the leaders will meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and visit the site of an alleged massacre. Ukraine has criticized France, Germany, and to a lesser extent Italy for allegedly foot-dragging in their support, accusing them of being slow to deliver weapons and of putting their own economies ahead of Ukraine's security. Meanwhile, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has reiterated his support for Moscow on sovereignty and security matters in a call with his counterpart, President Vladimir Putin. Speaking on his 69th birthday, Mr. Xi pledged to deepen strategic coordination between the two countries. Ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China has sought to remain neutral on the conflict, calling for a peaceful solution. But the U.S. has expressed concern, warning that nations which side with Mr. Putin over his invasion of Ukraine will be on the wrong side of history. A separate readout from the Kremlin said the two leaders stressed their countries' relations were at an all-time high and reaffirmed their commitment to consistently deepen the comprehensive partnership. The United States has announced a fresh infusion of $1 billion in weapons for Ukraine that includes anti-ship rocket systems, artillery rockets, howitzers, and ammunition. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the latest weapons package for Ukraine would also include 2 Harpoon coastal defense systems, artillery, rockets, secure radios, and thousands of night vision devices and funding for training. Ukraine is pressing the United States and other Western nations for speedy deliveries of weapons in the face of increased pressure from the Russian forces in the eastern Donbas region.
And I'm especially pleased to be able to announce today that the United States will provide an additional $1 billion security assistance package for Ukraine. And that includes our 12th drawdown from DoD inventory since August of 2021. And it includes guided MLRS munitions, 18 more M777 howitzers, and the tactical vehicles to tow them, and 36,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition. I think we have to put things in perspective. You can never, when you're in the fight, you can never get enough, and you can never get it quick enough. So, but having said all that, we're going to work hard to make sure we're doing everything humanly possible. We're going to continue to move heaven and earth to get them the capability that they need.
The Russians are just doing massed fires without necessarily achieving military effect, shall we say. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are using much better artillery techniques, and they're having pretty good effect on the Russians. The Russians have lost probably somewhere in the tune of 20 to 30% of their armored force. That's significant. That's huge. So the Ukrainians are fighting a very effective fight tactically with both fires and maneuver.
And in a more developing and disturbing story, 2 Americans fighting alongside Ukrainian forces north of Kharkiv in Ukraine have been declared missing for nearly a week, and the affairs that they are may have been captured by Russian forces, according to their families and a fellow fighter. The men are Alexander John Robert Druk from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Andy Tai Ngok Hyun from Hartselle, Alabama. A man who wished to remain nameless for security reasons, who is acting as the team's sergeant, says Druk and Hyun went missing during the battle and subsequent search missions failed to find any remains. Bernie Druk, Alex's mother, says they are presumed to be prisoners of war, but that has not been confirmed. She said the United States Embassy in Ukraine has not been able to verify whether her son has been captured either. And following the reports of the capture of 2 Americans, the White House has urged Americans not to travel to Ukraine. John Kirby, National Security Council spokesperson, told reporters that if the reports are true, the United States will do everything it can to get them back.
We'll do the best we can to monitor this and see what we can learn about it. Well, without getting into a hypothetical, obviously, if it's true, we'll do everything we can to get them safely back home. I do think, however, that this is an important point in time to remind that we discourage Americans from going to Ukraine and fighting in Ukraine. It is a war zone. It's combat. And if you feel passionate about supporting Ukraine, there's any number of other ways to do that that are safer and just as effective. Ukraine is not the place for Americans to be traveling. President Zelensky is the democratically elected leader of that country, and he gets to determine how this war ends. He gets to determine how he defines victory and how he gets at that outcome. I don't think we're in a position to absolutely confirm the reports. Certainly, we're also in no position to refute them at this time. Obviously, Mr. Navalny is speaking for himself. But I would tell you, we continue to reiterate our demand for his immediate and unconditional release from being imprisoned over spurious charges after a sham trial. And the Russian authorities ought to immediately end their harassment and intimidation against him and his supporters, and again, continue to call for his immediate and unconditional release.
French President Emmanuel Macron says that Moldova's bid to join the European Union was, quote, perfectly legitimate. He was speaking at a joint news conference with Moldovan President Meir Sandu. Moldova, located between Ukraine and EU member Romania, is one of 3 former Soviet republics, along with Georgia and Ukraine itself, that submitted applications to join the European Union within days of Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine. France, which chairs the European Union until the end of this month, will help reach a consensus amongst EU members on the issue of Moldova's application to join the bloc at a crucial council meeting next week. Mr. Macron described the fighting in Ukraine as ever more violent and said, we cannot allow ourselves to show the least bits of weakness. Mr. Macron said he wanted to reach a consensus on granting official candidate status to the 3 countries, adding that Moldova's application should not be separated from that of Ukraine. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says Turkey's expectations were not met by documents from Sweden, adding that any negotiations on the northern European countries' bid to join NATO would have to address Turkey's demands first. Sweden and Finland applied to join the alliance last month in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Their applications have faced unexpected opposition from Turkey, which has been angered by what it deems is Swedish support for Kurdish militants and by a previous decision to withdraw arms export licenses to Turkey. And Turkish media outlets are reporting that a hotline has been established between Russian and Ukrainian generals to negotiate the question of safely getting ships loaded with grain out of the port of Odessa, citing the defense ministry in Ankara. Millions of tons of foodstuff are stranded in Ukrainian ports. Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar has set up this defense hotline between the ministries in Moscow and Kiev, with a general officer designated at both ends to discuss the technical issues of unblocking the ships. He described the proposed arrangement as having Ukrainians clear the mines in their ports so the ships can live, then having the Russian Navy escort the ships from the ports to the designated assembly areas while clearing any stray mines along the way, at which point the Turkish Navy would take over the escort through the Black Sea to ensure their safety. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says it is a struggle to get the equipment and weapons his country needs. Kiev is pleading for faster and more frequent deliveries of weapons as Russian President Vladimir Putin seeks full control of the Donbass and a swathe of southern Ukraine. Western nations have promised Ukraine NATO-standard weapons, but deploying them is taking time. Yesterday, Mr. Zelensky held a meeting with the leaders of Montenegro, Albania, and North Macedonia, where he received a significant decision by these countries to support Ukraine's candidacy to the EU.
We are defending Donbass. And by the way, in all international contacts, I can hear admiration for the actions of our male and female defenders. The world really wants to learn from Ukraine how to fight and how to win. During the 112 days of this war, the Ukrainian army has proven that courage and wisdom on the battlefield, together with the ability to tactically outplay the enemy, produces significant results, even despite the Russian army's significant advantage in the number of soldiers and equipment. Of course, we will do everything to outdo these current advantages. Every day, I struggle for Ukraine to get the weapons and equipment it needs. Of course, the Russian state wouldn't be itself if it simply observed our foreign policy successes at ease. Once again, they intensify the gas pressure on Europe. They are once again stepping up the shelling of Ukrainian positions and peaceful cities. Today, they have hit communities in Kharkiv region. Russian propagandists have become more active in throwing out fake news in order to provoke despondency in Ukraine. But I do not believe that even one of those fake news is capable of being effective.
Що хоча б якийсь із цих фейків здатен спрацювати.
Let's talk now to Ambassador Roy Ohidevie, who is a retired member of the military, a fellow of the International Institute of Professional Security, and a member of the American Society of Industrial Security. Your Excellency, good morning. Thank you for your time on the program. He joins us from our Abuja studios.
Yeah, good morning. It's always a pleasure.
It looks like a lot of activity is moving on both the military and diplomatic fronts, but let's start off from the diplomatic front, shall we? It does look as if Turkey, which has been the most active country, we shall say, on the diplomatic front, seems to have made a breakthrough with the issue of food and grain supplies. If the story about the hotline and the process by which grain leaves Ukraine gets to be implemented.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. You see, on diplomatic transactions, the food is one of the major and key parameters to discuss. The economy itself is being affected by the whole crisis and the war itself. So if we are looking at what Turkey is trying to achieve, then we'll be asking ourselves some questions. Is Turkey going to create a kind of monopoly on that opportunity? Because Turkey itself is still in aggression with Sweden and Finland on their opportunity to join EU and NATO. So if we allow individual countries to begin to have monopoly of opportunity, it will not help the war, because we know that business is business to global transactions.
Given that scenario, and I'm sure quite a lot of people who are listening and watching you will understand what you're saying, but right now, all that grain, the last time we checked, it was more than 20 million tons of it, is stuck in the Ukrainian ports, and those who need it to survive, those who need it to feed, no doubt, including countries like Nigeria, are not getting hold of it. So wouldn't you say that it's better to get it out first, then we can come back and address Turkey's position if it becomes untenable down the road?
Yeah, I agree with you, but if you catch my drift, I was actually implementing a process where you are dealing with the exposures and the vulnerability and the monopoly in the process of fighting for the release and disbursements to countries and hungry persons that need it. Now, if you look at why you need to deal with both in tandem, you will understand that when you release those grains and you don't put in purview the opportunities to monopolize that process and the opportunity to use it as a soft weapon, then you will not be addressing the backlash from all the activities that we'll do in haste.
Let us look at the other side of the diplomacy. The leaders of France, Italy, and Germany are in Ukraine this morning, and some people have chosen to call them the coalition of the unwilling, but they're there to show support. But the Ukrainians have been fairly critical of the three countries to varying degrees because they say that they're being very hesitant in their support of Ukraine. Do you think this visit will, beyond the photo ops, will change anything in terms of that support?
Okay, yeah. It's unfortunate to understand that most of these global powers, with world information and previous happenings, you will understand that they only deal in areas where they can address their interests. So that has all been the delay in all the things that are supposed to be delivered to Ukraine as support. So if their visit is concluded in harmony or to harmonize all the areas of need, then we can begin to look at their internal control system. So even if they agree with the other countries to give all the support, each of those countries need to go back, like France and Germany particularly, to talk within their own internal control, their diplomats within, and see if their support will be accepted back home. Because the discussions we are talking about are going to be like agreements, so that even after the war, these are things that will be running as a friendship portal for the countries involved.
What might be, for some people, a nightmare just seems to have happened if the reports are correct, and that is that 2 Americans fighting for the Ukrainians are said to have been captured. They may have been captured by the Russians because they've been missing for almost a week. Now, given the fact that 2 Britons and a Moroccan earlier this week were sentenced to death, and the British are struggling with that, do you think this would probably bring some kind of measured response, or the Americans will probably go all out, including maybe now putting boots on the ground to protect potential citizens from getting in harm's way?
Yeah, hearing the news about the Moroccan and the British, I suspected that actually because of the Ukraine not being a member of NATO, it has restricted the opportunities to put boots on ground and go all out against the invasion. So if you begin to look at infringement of the rights of citizens of other countries, then we need to also look at the relationship between the Americans and Ukraine and see that if they have the right to get into Ukraine at that time as a fighting troop, or if they live there as citizens of Ukraine and they are being abducted by the Russian army, or if they went in there to fight for Ukraine, what authorization does it get? So Americans can look at their books and agree to say, whatever it is, we're going to bring out our persons, and this might just be a leeway to begin to have opportunities to put boots on ground.
Let's look at the military situation on the ground. Beyond the propaganda and the various things said by all the sides in this, it does look like, in spite of Ukraine's spirited and ferocious resistance, Russia is slowly getting its way, particularly in the Donbas region. And there are those who have pointed to NATO's Secretary General having said that this might now be time to make some kind of compromise to prevent further destruction and to bring about peace. Do you think it is?
Yeah, you see, from the onset of the battle, the war, I look at some of the battles that have been fought in different places, and I began to understand that, yes, there is global compassion for Ukraine, but definitely Russian incursion will gradually hold ground and take spaces and conquer communities. But then I understood that the opportunity to get weapons and mercenaries from other countries, volunteers from other countries, gets increasing value every day. But there is a delay to supply. You heard the NATO speech recently when they are saying they are trying to conquer the delays to supply those weapons. And you are on air. You are already saying that you are going to supply XYZ kinds of weapons. So I don't think it's helping Ukraine, because the real battle is on the ground. The fighting is on the ground, not in the propaganda. So if we look at the statistics on ground right now, we will say Russia is taking spaces, Russia is conquering grounds and holding spaces. But then, if we get these supplies and the personnel to handle those weaponry that we talk about, will it give the humanitarian side the appropriate defense and protection that it needs? That is where my fear is.
Indeed, that is where the fear of all of us who are watching this situation closely is. Ambassador Roy Ohidebe, thank you so much for your time and your perspective this morning.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
After the break, a Romanian port becomes key transit hub for Ukrainian grain. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Kremlin says that communication remains essential in relations with the United States amidst tensions over Russia's continuing war in Ukraine. Relations between Russia and the West were already frosty since the end of the Cold War, even before Moscow sent thousands of troops into Ukraine in what it calls a special military operation. The West responded with an unprecedented barrage of sanctions, and U.S. President Joe Biden pledged to make Russian President Vladimir Putin a pariah on the world stage. Russia accused Washington of waging an economic war. Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesperson, says the current situation makes it unlikely that the two sides would get back to what he called the spirit of Geneva, a reference to a summit between President Biden and Putin in 2021 that raised hopes of limited détente. He said future communication between the two countries, the world's biggest nuclear powers, would have to be based on mutual respect and mutual benefit. Britain's Defense Secretary Ben Wallace will be speaking to the Turkish government next week about Sweden and Finland's NATO applications. Speaking at a news conference in Oslo, he said it was, quote, important to listen to Turkey. Mr. Wallace was in Norway for a training session of the Joint Expeditionary Force, a British-led grouping made up of Denmark, Estonia, Finland and Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway and Sweden. Mr. Wallace says that having all of the member nations part of NATO would send a message to Russia that its aggression has been counterproductive. He also says that fighting Ukrainian forces were exhausted and that more needs to be done to help them not only by supplying weapons, but also by providing training.
Jeff, unity is very strong. A group of like-minded nations, a group of nations that exercises and trains regularly together, and a group of nations that came together again today to reaffirm our support for Sweden and Finland's accession to NATO. Incredibly important for Jeff. That would make all 10 nations members of NATO, and I think, considering Russia's current aggressive posture, an important message to President Putin that his aggression has been counterproductive, and he has in fact now found 2 more countries wanting to join NATO on his border. That is not because of us, that is because of his activity, and Jeff stands fully behind Sweden and Finland's application and shall do all we can to help. I myself will be speaking to the Turkish government next week, and I think it is very important we listen and understand Turkey's concerns and work to a position where Turkey will support the accession and indeed that we can mitigate any of those concerns.
Norway has been donating weapons several rounds, and our latest donation was heavy artillery. And we are considering further donations. We're also having a good cooperation with the United Kingdom regarding their, what should I call it, their financial mechanism for procuring even more weapon and ammunition. We are donating to that fund or financial mechanism so that we can help Ukraine even more defend themselves.
Russia says it has offered safe passage for Ukraine grain shipments from the country's Black Sea ports, but is not responsible for establishing the corridors, as Turkey suggested. Ukrainian grain shipments have stalled since Russia's invasion and ports blockade, stoking global prices for grains, cooking oils, fuel, and fertilizer. The United Nations is trying to broker a deal to resume Ukraine grain exports and Russian food and fertilizer exports, which Moscow says are harmed by sanctions. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said earlier in the week that it would take some time to demine Ukraine's ports, and a safe sea corridor could meanwhile be established in areas without mines under the UN proposal.
For establishing safe corridors, we said that we could provide safe passage if these corridors are established, and to establish them, it's obvious it's either to demine the territory which was mined by the Ukrainians or to ensure that the passage goes around those mines that are in the harbor. I would like to say to the Western countries supplying weaponry to Ukraine, the blood of civilians is on your hands. The tragedy in Donetsk confirms once again that you are fighting a proxy war with Russia with the hands of Ukrainians till the last Ukrainian. The recent shelling of Donetsk is another horrible war crime committed by the agonizing Kiev regime. It is a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, including the principles of proportionality, military necessity, distinction, and humanity. Kiev regime will be held responsible for that. However, its Western sponsors are equally responsible for these horrendous crimes. The material evidence shows that the people in Donetsk were killed by the 155mm artillery rounds supplied to the Kiev regime by the NATO countries, including the US, Canada, the Netherlands, France, and others. There have been reports about the cluster munition of the French origin found in Donetsk after shelling, though France declared that it destroyed its cluster munitions stockpile in 2016.
Japan's low-cost airline Zip Air Tokyo has said that it will replace its logo featuring the letter Z to avoid confusion following the use of the letter as Russia's main symbol in what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine. The president of the wholly owned subsidiary of Japan Airlines told reporters that some people might see the current logo, which appears on the aircraft tail, as indicating that the company approves of Russia's invasion. The new logo will be a geometric pattern in green, black, and white, according to the company. A move by Russian energy firm Gazprom to reduce the amount of gas it supplies to Germany has been called political rather than a technical justifiable decision by Germany's economy minister. Mr. Robert Habeck says Russia's actions showed that it was urgent for European countries to end their dependence on fossil fuels. Gazprom is limiting the amount of gas it sends through the Nord Stream pipeline to under 70 million cubic meters per day, well under half the current rate. The gas giant also announced a sharp reduction for Italy. Both countries are heavily reliant on Russian gas, but are looking at how to reduce their dependence. The Romanian Black Sea port in the city of Constanta has become one of the main transit hubs for Ukrainian grain exports. The war-torn country is racing to export about 20 million tons of grain stuck in its silos in time to accommodate the harvest of its new crops, which is set to start next month. Dan Dolgin, director of the cereal operation at Comvex, one of the main grain operations in the Constanta port, said before the war there was absolutely no Ukrainian cereal transiting the Constanta port, but now it amounts to approximately 30% of their activity. Let's talk to Ini John Mekwa, about grain, which we did talk about before now. Hi, Ini.
Good morning.
The situation, let's start off with gas before we get to grain. We just heard the Nord Stream gas pipeline is
having technical issues.
You know, the Germans don't believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you believe that because even the technical issues, everywhere you see it, it's in quotes. Because
well, the Germans say it's technical issues. Sorry,
no,
the Russians say
it's technical issues,
yes.
and I don't think a lot of people believe that because it's too strategic. Because at the same time, Russia has cut its gas supply to Italy by 15%. And they didn't even give any reason for that. So, I mean, what are you talking about? There's also the reaction to Canadian too. The pipeline that supplies has also been shut. So, I mean, is that also a technical issue? So, this is obviously reaction to the sanctions and all that. And, you know, we discussed this earlier, that even though the EU is planning to wean itself of Russian gas and oil by the end of the year, it seems Russia is making that even earlier than was planned. And you talked about Gazprom. You know, Gazprom has this Gazprom Germania arm, which is, you know, the one that was controlled by Germany. You know, Russia has cut itself off that. And that is also, well, even before time, costing a whole lot to the consumers in Germany. Because now Gazprom Germania has to buy gas from the retailers' market because they have to supply to consumers. So, of course, it's more expensive. So,
and, of course, the consumers are going to get the bad end of that stick.
Yeah, they are going to pay for it, but eventually it's going to feed into the economy, feed into inflation, feed into commodity prices, feed into manufacturing. We've talked about how a lot of corporates, even in EU, are looking to Asia now to get some raw materials, to get some stones, and you know, because production in EU is now becoming really expensive
and very difficult to go on with.
Yes, and very difficult to go. And this is even before the winning of. But I guess Russia is trying to make EU get used to it even before time.
If that is what they are trying to do.
Well, if that's what they are trying to do, I guess.
The search for gas has taken the EU to some very unlikely places.
Unlikely places.
They've gone to Israel and Egypt to look for gas. What's all that about?
Yeah, yesterday the EU signed an MOU with Israel and Egypt for the supply of gas and electricity. So, Israel has, I think, about 1 trillion cubic reserve of gas, and nobody used to look at it before now. So now everybody's scampering and looking at some hidden resources, I wish it would come the way of Nigeria to really help us, you know, because we are also having a lot of issues at this time. You know, so they have signed that agreement, but we always talk about infrastructure and the time it will take. It's going to take about 7 years to build that infrastructure, you know. So what do they do in between that time? They also have another construction they're doing that's supposed to supply electricity, because mostly the gas is supposed to be used for electricity, you know, among other things. So from Egypt to the EU for electricity, that's also another project. But all these are, as Nigerians will say, in the pipeline, because they're construction that will take years and a lot of money, you know, to get to see the light of the day.
Speaking about pipelines, it's a play on words, but rather prescient at this time. But in spite of everything we've talked about, Ini, things are still going on. The Petersburg International Economic Forum opened, and from the visuals I saw, the attendance, yes, there are some notable absentees, but there are also some notable presentees.
Presentees. You know, sometimes the Western media can be kind of naughty, if I could use that word. So they said now they have some, what do they call it? You know, some of those militia groups that they are the ones attending now. Well, I don't know. I'm not there.
We're not. We're not.
I'm just saying, but I mean, of course, you would expect most of the 28 countries that have been sanctioned by Russia are not there, even though I do see that they still have a space for the presidents of the Chamber of Commerce from the United States. I don't know how he's going to get there. I don't know how is going to make it there. But mostly this used to be a platform for conversation and projection for the corporates, all those oil companies that deal, with Russian oil and gas and all those ICT. It used to be a really great, I think you have about 115 or so countries participating normally, but at this time, obviously, that's been thinned out. But, Russia, they will always get things done, so they are pushing on with that summit. And I learned President Putin is supposed to be there, I think, today to discuss fostering new relationships and expecting a lot of participation from Asian countries, to try to build up new ties, create markets.
A lot of people will be watching out for what he says at that event, because that will show the new economic direction of Russia. And speaking about economic directions, the Russian people and companies are, we talk about this very often, very innovative ways.
Very innovative.
They're using entities in Georgia.
Yes.
To bypass the Western side.
Yeah, so, back here in Nigeria, we do complain of too much paperwork. If you want to deal with CAC, for instance, now, you're supposed to just be able to go online. So that's what Russians are doing now. So they just stay at home, go online, create a company, get it all sealed. And so if you have a company from Russia, it doesn't, because it's online, you don't know where you're doing it from. It's a Georgian company, even though it belongs to a Russian. You put in some money there, also have a bank account, open a bank account virtually, and then you can do your business as if you're not in Russia. The sanctions are behind you. So talk about innovation, and I think you should look the way of Russia. There's always a way out.
They've continued to prove extremely prescient with all these things, which is not a surprise. Thank you so very much, Ini, for that. Of course, there'll be updates from Ini and from Laddie Williams on all of this and more, and particularly President Putin's remarks at the St. Petersburg's Economic Summit later on today. All of that will be on Business Morning and Business Incorporated, so do watch out for that. We're taking a quick break at this point, and after that, world tennis #1, Daniel Medvedev, is grateful for the chance to defend his title in the United States. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova says the death sentences handed down to foreign fighters in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic would set a clear example to other soldiers of fortune fighting for Ukraine. 2 Britons and 1 Moroccan who were captured while fighting with the Ukrainian army were sentenced to death as mercenaries by Russian-backed authorities in the breakaway territory in eastern Ukraine on June the 9th. Western officials say the men should be treated as regular soldiers taken prisoner in war and are therefore entitled to protection under the Geneva Conventions. The relatives say they were all contracted to fight for Ukraine. Let's talk now to our London correspondent, Juliana Olainka, who joins me from the British capital. Good morning, Juliana. Now, let's begin.
Good morning, Laddie.
What's the official British position on all of this today?
Well, it's, as you've described, these 2 British nationals, Aidan Aslin and Sean Moroccan national, were sentenced to death by a firing squad in a court in the People's Republic of Donetsk. The British government have completely condemned what they considered a sham proceeding. We have heard from the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, as well as from the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, saying that the ruling should be overruled and that they should be freed, or at least treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. I think there's a lot of context and nuance to this story, Laddie, because we know that in the early days of the war, lots of people, lots of independent soldiers, lots of Brits were told that they should go to Ukraine, that they should fight the good fight. We even heard of Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, asking people to do their utmost to assist. And many British individuals took that flight. So many of them were going to the Ukrainian embassy, and many of them ended up fighting in Ukraine. Some have been captured. We don't know their whereabouts, but these are the first two individuals that have been captured by Russian separatists, and they have been tried. Now, what we are hearing, as you just quietly quoted the Russian spokesperson, is that potentially Russia could get involved. I think the issue very early on was that Donetsk is run by Russian separatists, that they don't get involved. However, we do know that there are so many prisoners of war who are being held in other parts of the world, and potentially there could be a prisoner swap. We haven't heard an official government response from what the Russian spokesperson has said. The families, at the very least, that if two prisoners who are being held and they are Russian are swapped with these prisoners, then perhaps this story could go away.
Well, even while we wait for that, it's scary to think that just as that was going on, there are two Americans who are now said to also be missing, and they're feared captured. And the Americans have issued a travel advisory saying that just like the Brits have just that people, shouldn't go on, and if they go, well, they should be properly advised on how to do that. Now, this is happening at the same time as the Russians have placed a ban on some prominent British journalists or journalists based in Britain. You are not on that list, but there are others on the list. What is all that about?
You're quite right, laddie. I'm not on the list yet. I don't think you've invited me on your program enough for me to have upset Vladimir Putin. But you're absolutely right. He always said that they will be retaliating sanctions, and earlier this week they've decided to do just that, and they've taken it out on some prominent British journalists that have been reporting on the ongoing invasion. Some of the names include the Director General of the BBC, the editor of The Telegraph, as well as some popular faces that our viewers in the UK will know about. Really, this is about Vladimir Putin saying that these journalists are spreading disinformation, that there's Russophobia. We do know that earlier in the year, Ofcom, the broadcast regulator, decided to take what some would consider an important, prominent channel off air, which was Russia Today or RT. You can't find their footage anywhere. YouTube, that is available to Brits in the UK, and they've decided to take out their anger by sanctioning these journalists. I think for the journalists who have been sanctioned, they're pretty okay with this. I don't think anybody in Britain who is reporting on the ongoing war there are some journalists who have been in Moscow, particularly from Sky News, who have felt in danger of their life. I think now that it's been enshrined into Russian law that you cannot use the term war when you're discussing the issue in Ukraine, it's pretty difficult. A lot of independent journalists on the ground feel like they have been silenced, and there have been threats of attack. So I think this is straight out of Vladimir Putin's playbook. You do this to me, and we'll do this to you.
There is also another developing story, which I don't know. I doubt that maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the situation in Ukraine. The European Union, which is front and center in that war, alongside Britain, is fighting Britain on another front, this time relating to Brexit. Can you unravel that? What is all that about, and how is that playing out?
Yeah, this is a huge issue that's developing into a very bitter dispute between Whitehall, Downing Street, and officials at Brussels. This is all about Brexit and the withdrawal agreement that was signed. It is about the Ireland Protocol. On Monday, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, set out a piece of new legislation which really rips up the fruition in January last year, because they deem the Northern Protocol Now, the reason why this is causing such tension in Brussels and, to be fair, across the world is because it has been signed into international law. This is what Boris Johnson's Conservative government agreed to, and now they feel like it's not working for them. They want to rip it up. Of course, the response from Brussels has been pretty stern and has been pretty strong. They said they will take this to the High Court. I believe yesterday they set out 3 sets of different legal channels that they could go to. But again, it is quite a complex situation. But in order to ensure that there was peace on the island, Britain decided to keep Northern Ireland into the European Union single market and the customs union. And because of that, Northern Ireland no longer believe that they're part of the UK. There were local elections a couple of weeks ago. Sinn Féin, which is the Irish party, they were able to gain quite a strong amount of seats. And the DUP, the Northern Ireland party, say they will not share power with them or sit in the Stront Parliament until the issue of the protocol has been resolved. That's what Boris Johnson and his government want to do, but then the international community believe that this could put still into jeopardy. And of course, it doesn't show Britain in a good favour. A lot of people weren't happy with Brexit. We decided to get on with Brexit, but now Brexit isn't working up the rule book. So that is it in a nutshell. It's a lot more complex than that. But as you said, it does have some bearings with the ongoing war in Ukraine, because of course we know that Europe and Western allies have been bounded together, but unfortunately this spat over what sausages should and should not be passing from Northern Ireland causes an inevitable fallout.
Indeed, it has. We'll be keeping a close eye on that, I'm sure, Juliana, and we'll be back to you sometime not too far for an update of that. Juliana Olayinka from the British capital, thank you. The head of the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, is worried that a food security crisis stoked by the Ukraine war is set to push more people to flee their homes in poorer countries, driving record levels of global displacements even higher. A report by the UN body showed that approximately 89.3 million people were forcibly displaced worldwide as a result of persecution, conflict, abuse, and violence at the end of 2021. Since then, millions more have fled Ukraine or have been displaced within its borders, with price hikes linked to blocked grain exports set to stoke more displacement elsewhere.
Will this also cause people to move? Now, it's very difficult to tell, but unfortunately, I cannot imagine how. If you have a food crisis on top of everything that I have described, right? War, human rights, climate, you name it. On top of that, you have a food crisis. It will just accelerate the trends that are described in this report and that we have seen accelerating already in the first few months of the year. The impact, if this is not resolved quickly, will be pretty devastating. It is already, by the way, it's not something that will happen. It is already happening, especially in terms of prices. This is really what is happening now that is very devastating for poor countries. 89 million is the figure, correct, Tarek, in the report related to 21. But even without Ukraine, we were already on a very high figure, unfortunately higher than the previous year, and this trend has been going on now for several years. Certainly since I've taken this job, every year there has been a higher displacement figure than the year before. Then, of course, as Junga mentioned already, we had Ukraine, and Ukraine has displaced anyway between 12 and 14 million people, depending on how you count them. So the figure has exceeded 100 million.
And in the sports news emanating from the war in Ukraine, world number 1 Daniil Medvedev is grateful that he will be able to defend his title at the US Open after organizers announced that Russian and Belarusian players would be allowed to compete as neutrals. As a Russian, Medvedev is banned from competing at Wimbledon after the All England Lawn Tennis Club barred players from 2 countries due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The decision by the United States Tennis Association stands in stark contrast to the Wimbledon ban. The U.S. Open begins on August the 29th in New York.
It's great. I heard this news yesterday, probably like everybody. And, you know, I always say that I have to follow the rules. Where I can play, I'm going to play. I'm going to try to play my best. I'm happy that I will be able to defend my title. It would be really disappointing if I would not be able to defend my title in US Open, because, yeah, that's some great memories, and always in US Open. It's an amazing tournament, probably the most special one for me. And yeah, I have not much more to add, you know. Happy that I can play.
The National Hockey League, the NHL, has confirmed that the Stanley Cup will not travel to Russia or Belarus this year as a result of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The Colorado Avalanche defeated the Tampa Bay Lightning 4-3 in overtime to take Game 1 of the Stanley Cup final. Tampa Bay has 3 Russians, Andrei Vasilevsky, Mikhail Sergachev, and Nikita Kucherov, while the Colorado Avalanche has 1 in Valery Nishushkin. Neither team has a player of Belarusian descent. NHL Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly says the league could allow for the cup to travel in the future, as it did during the past 2 pandemic-affected championships, but there is no set time for this to take place. However, Russian and Belarusian players will still be allowed to enter the NHL draft in July. Finally, on our program, Spain's King Felipe has attended a Flotex 22 exercise organized by the Spanish Navy at Aero Naval Base in Rota. Footage showed Navy soldier drills arriving at the beach and vessels carrying army tanks overseen by King Felipe himself, along with all the mandates of Spanish Army forces. 4,000 units from the Spanish Army and Air Force, permanent NATO groups, and units from the United States, United Kingdom, and Belgium participated, in addition to those integrated in the European Union Maritime Force. Spain will host a NATO summit in Madrid on June the 28th to 30th amidst the Russian invasion of Ukraine and with the potential of new allies. And that's how we end the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. There's an update within the world today at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. But for now, do go out there and have yourselves a great day ahead. Good morning.